going on, Archons? Just doing a little goldfish kitchen table KeyForge with myself, testing this deck, running it through its paces. And this week is going to be an interesting episode because I want to talk about a few, just one topic this week. But first, let's talk about the card of the week. And the card of the week is, that's right, Imperial Forge. So this card I really like. I got it in my very first Worlds Collide deck, and I really enjoyed playing it. For those not familiar, you gain a pip for playing it. It is a key cheat in Saurians, and it says play Forge a key at +8 current cost, reduced by 1 ember for each ember on friendly creatures. So Imperial Forge is the card of the week. I find it's a really interesting key cheat because you are putting so much ember on the board as a proposition to play this card, and so the strategy of when to play it and when not to, I think, really comes into play. And there's a lot of interesting decisions, I think, to be made within that card and in the game of KeyForge as a result. So I really like playing that card, and I think it's such an interesting key cheat because you're putting so much on the table to make it pull off, and as a result, your opponent could take advantage of that. So it's a really interesting card. I think it's great for closing out games. Now, this week I wanted to talk about the idea of how a deck changes with the meta over time. And I'm talking about this because I have noticed that Coda decks have definitely changed in terms of their viability. There's a lot of Coda decks that do what they do, but I've noticed that it seems like FFG might be actually trying to take away the power and counter what Coda presented as such a powerhouse to start the game. And as we saw sets that followed, there was things that you're wondering, can something keep up with these Coda decks? And I think we're starting to see that evolution of certain decks do not work in Coda the same way as they used to. This is not just Coda though, it's in a lot of different things as well. Like I have a couple AoA decks that were really strong, and now they're not quite as strong because of how the meta has evolved and the card pool that we were playing with. And I find that so fascinating in a game where all the decks are evergreen. So I have a Coda deck that has stood the test of time. It's actually gotten better as the meta has evolved, and I find that so fascinating. And that really tells you what a truly good deck is. If it can withstand and be a new force to reckon with the meta as it changes, I think that's so fascinating and one of the great things we have within this game of KeyForge. I don't know if you've experienced this with some of your decks. You probably noticed some that have fallen by the wayside. You're like, oh, they're not quite as powerful. Like what it used to do, it does not do as well. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're seeing an increase in board-based decks, and the ability to answer or not answer a board can really be detrimental to how your deck can play and how it can stand up with it. And it's really fascinating because I find when you go back to these decks that were your original go-to powerhouses, and you're seeing this shift where now certain things are happening that are making them not as strong. A big one I think that's quite interesting is we saw in the Coda era a really strong pip decks where you just had a ton of Ember pips on your deck, and as long as you played cards and cycled, you'd win just by the sheer generation of Amber from playing cards. And now we're having cards like Master of the Grey come out, where if you cannot deal with a Master of the Grey, that deck is essentially useless. It's not going to get those pips, you're not going to be able to do the thing, and that's just the way it is. And I find that so fascinating as something that exists within the game, how a couple cards can really change, or the composition of what the set wants to do, being a board-based set, being a key cost increase set. Like there's all these things that we're seeing in evolution, and I'm sure when Dark Tidings comes, I know no spoilers, we're going to see a next evolution within the game, and it's just interesting. And I love revisiting old favorites as a result of this and seeing what they can do and what they can't do as a result of the meta changing or the cards just changing. I don't even think it has to do with meta sometimes. I think it's actually just the nature of decks available that can be played and the composition of a set, because we are seeing that each set is being brought forward with a interesting aspect to it that is different from the one before, as you would expect. But I mean, you had the strong enhancements aspect of Mass Mutation. Now we're seeing the Tide aspect come in Dark Tidings. These are all things that are unique to that one set, and it's very interesting to see how it impacts a deck from the past. And I just love that proposition of how KeyForge can be done that way. It makes the game so interesting because it's not like other card games where you can just swap out some cards in your deck, put some other ones in, so the aspect you had that you like still exists, and then these new aspects can be brought in to really evolve that. I think that's so interesting and unique within KeyForge, is that a deck can hold its place in time, and then maybe it falls by the wayside, and then suddenly new things happen, and now it rises again. KeyForge decks are like phoenixes, you know, they can just rise from the ashes. They wither away, reborn again. It's a great thing about this game, and I'm very happy that we get to experience this level of gameplay in different ways, and that we get to have decks that we visit for a time period, enjoy them, and then maybe they go somewhere else, and then you come back and suddenly they're strong again, or maybe they're weak now when they were strong because there's certain cards in the meta that actually make it not as viable, and you could be going up against those. I also think it makes the Triad format that's more interesting, because as Triad goes on with time, we're going to have more sets and more different aspects that sets present that you're going to have to counter or think about and consider with what you're doing. Is a Coda Rush deck strategy still viable in Triad when that happens? You never know. Like, we're going to find out. But it does seem strong at times, but also it could be weak. It's very interesting for me just to look at my decks and revisit old ones and play against old decks on TCO with the new meta and see what happens. I find it so fascinating. I had one deck that was good, and then suddenly Exalting happened, where all this Ember was on the field constantly, and my Nature's Calls just became like the most badass cards in the deck and would just do things that were not possible before and would help me achieve my end game way faster than it originally looked in the game. So I found that so interesting to me. That does it for this week. I just wanted to share my thoughts about this. Like, what do you think about how decks change over time with new sets? Have you gone back and visited old favorites? Have you seen the impact that they have? Have they gotten better? Have they gotten worse? Are they doing exactly what you expect them to do still? Let me know. And as you may know, I did the first draw for a deck giveaway, and I'm going to be doing this more and more. And as the Patreon numbers get higher, I will be doing these more frequently. And I just hope you would love to support and be a part of this deck giveaway. And I also want to know, would you prefer French decks are given away so that you have another language deck in your collection, or do you prefer English? I have a multitude of either, so I can always rely on each. But let me know your thoughts, and if you wish to be a part of this, just click the Patreon link in my comment section, and there will be one more drawing this upcoming week for another deck to give away, 2 in March, just for YouTube subs. And yeah, so one more, and then it'll be Patreon only moving forward in April. So become a part of this. I appreciate all your support, and as always, may your ember never be stolen and your keys forged promptly. Have a good one.